COVID-19 Vaccine Damage Bill, second reading.
Al?
Sir Christopher Chope.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to move the second reading of the COVID-19 Vaccine Damage Bill, which is a very hot topic, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to do justice to it in 23 minutes. But I start off with the proposition that those of us who have been double jabbed with vaccine against COVID-19 must count our blessings if we've not suffered any adverse consequences, and I am happy to include myself within that category. This bill is about all those who have suffered injury or even death as a result of enlisting in the war against COVID by being vaccinated. The numbers affected are relatively low, which is all the more reason why the government should not be playing hard to get in relation to the compensation scheme for those who do suffer adverse consequences as a result of having done the right thing. The government has produced quite a lot of information about the amount of vaccine, the extent of vaccine damage, and some of that is set out in the documents which the government produces in relation to those who have applied for compensation or have notified under the yellow card scheme. And essentially what the yellow card scheme shows in the most recent report, which came out I think on the 9th of September and covers the period from the 9th of December up until the 1st of September. It shows that there have been 435 reports of major blood clots and low platelet counts, including 74 deaths. It shows that there have been 767 cases of inflammation of the heart, a condition which is almost unheard of in medicine on a normal day-to-day basis. It shows that there have been some 35,000 reports of menstrual disorder, and there are all sorts of other effects which are set out in the comprehensive report. But it also, I think very worryingly, says that there are 1,632 reports of deaths having taken place shortly after vaccination. And I think if we're trying to build vaccine confidence, we need to actually ensure that we're open with the public about the facts. And that's why I was very disappointed when I asked the Secretary of State on the 7th of July what information his department holds on the number of deaths that have been reported of people who have died within 1 month, 2 months and 3 months of having received a COVID-19 vaccination since the 1st of January. And yes, but perhaps it'd be more convenient if I actually read out the answer that we received from the Minister. And he said, data on the number of deaths reported of people who have died within 1, 2 and 3 months of having received the COVID-19 vaccination since the 1st of January is not available in the format requested. Public Health England monitors the number of people who have been admitted to hospital and died from COVID-19 who have received 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine and will publish this data in due course. That data has not yet been published. And I think it's very important that we are able to put this issue into context, because there's a lot more damage being done to our citizens as a result of COVID-19 vaccinations than in any other vaccination programme in history. That doesn't mean to say it's not worthwhile, and I'm certainly not an anti-vaxxer or anything like that. But what I do think is important is that if people do the right thing, that they shouldn't be denied access to compensation. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. right honourable friend is making a very strong case. But would he agree with me that we don't want to send a message from this House that vaccines are a bad thing? Vaccines are right, and we should be vaccinated. But equally, on the very rare occasion when it goes wrong, isn't it right that there is compensation made available on those very rare occasions?
Well, that's exactly my point, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for summarising it so succinctly and accurately. That's, I think, where the government comes into this. And unfortunately, I know that the Minister is not going to have much time, if any, in which to expand upon this issue today. And so I hope that he'd be willing to arrange for me to be able to come along, perhaps with one or two colleagues, to talk to ministers about this very important issue. Yes, of course.
I hope I can give my honourable friend the reassurance that I, or perhaps more appropriately, the relevant minister, will, I'm sure, be happy to meet him to discuss this legislation.
I'm most grateful for that. And of course, there's some doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, as to who the relevant minister is, because when I put down questions on this subject, I'm told that it's the responsibility of the Department for Work and Pensions to deal with the Vaccine Damage Act. And from that department, I've received information as to the number of applications that have been made up until the middle of July, and they were up until the 23rd of June. There had been 154 applications, obviously many more now, but there are only 4 people in that department dealing with all vaccine damage applications, and so there haven't been any decisions made. No decisions have been made at all, and there's no indication as to when any decisions are going to be forthcoming. Of course I will.
Right honourable friend give way. Just on, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just looking at the government website here, it's the government did a press release on the 3rd of December last year saying that COVID-19 was going to be added to the vaccine damage payment scheme. Are you saying that it hasn't been yet, or that it has been?
I'm not. I think Madam Deputy Speaker is not saying anything. I am saying that it has been added. It was added to the scheme, but from all intents and purposes, it seems to have just been a gesture, because in the substance of it, people have now started applying under the Act for compensation, and none of those cases have been dealt with. No decisions have been made in any of those cases, and worryingly, there's now a government response to a petition which really reflects what's in my bill, because what it calls for is reform of the 1979 Act to improve support for those who've been harmed by COVID-19 vaccines. You may remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Pearson Commission found that those injured as a result of vaccination should have access to financial support, and that was the background to the 1979 Act. But that Act makes provision of a maximum payment of £120,000, together with a threshold of 60% disablement, and as a result, fewer than 2% of applications are successful. That's why I think, and that's what this bill calls for, it calls for the government to carry out an inquiry, set up a judge-led inquiry into the issues which are raised, because reforming the Vaccine Damage Payments Act would increase vaccine confidence and would provide urgent support for those who have been injured or bereaved through the vaccination against COVID-19. So what did the Minister say when he responded to that petition? Because, as you will know, Madam Deputy Speaker, when a petition has gathered over 10,000 signatures, then that's a trigger for a government response. We don't get a debate in this House until 100,000 signatures. What the response dated the 5th of August says is the government has a robust system to monitor potential side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine and has added the vaccine to the VDPS. We will consider further action as more evidence becomes available. And then it goes on to tell us what we already know about the 1979 Act. And then it says, whilst understanding the desire and need to move forward rapidly with processing these claims, it is important to have an established evidence base around causational links between the vaccine and potential side effects. Not doing so risks claims being declined in error based on a lack of evidence, disadvantaging applicants. But of course, we've already got a lot of evidence that people have suffered damage or if not death as a result of these vaccinations. And there was recently a coroner's report of somebody, I think in the north of England, who had definitely, the coroner's verdict was that that person had died as a direct result of receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. So the Minister then goes on to say, more widely, the government is currently looking at how it can improve the operational aspects of the VDPS to better meet the additional demand created by the inclusion of the COVID-19 vaccine and improve the customer experience. Once more is known about the possible links between the vaccine and potential side effects, it will be considered whether a wider review of the VDPS is needed. Well, my bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, answers that question by saying we need such a review now. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member. Fridays are a wonderful thing in this place. He calls for a judge-led inquiry. I quite understand the importance of the issue, but there are many in the country who believe there should be a judge-led inquiry into many aspects of what's happened on COVID. And there will be many who will wonder why this should be preferenced over other issues. I wonder if he could give his thoughts as how he would explain to care workers in care homes, for instance, why their concerns should not be considered at the same time as these important concerns.
Well, as far as on the point about care workers in care homes and the requirement that this House has now made that they should all be vaccinated, even if they have got a genuine desire not to be vaccinated for reasons because they may be fearful of the consequences. Although these consequences only flow in a minority of cases, it surely should be the judgment of each individual as to whether or not they are going to take the risk of having a vaccination or whether they're not going to take a risk of having a vaccination. And obviously we know that even if people are vaccinated, it doesn't mean that they are immune from COVID-19, and it certainly doesn't mean that they are incapable of transmitting COVID-19 to somebody else. So those are all issues which need to be weighed up. But going back to the Honourable Gentleman's challenge, which is basically, he seems to be suggesting that these hapless families, probably 10,000 of them, maybe more than that, who have suffered real serious damage as a result of doing the right thing, that those people should be left hanging around for years wondering whether or not they're going to be eligible for any compensation. I think that that is totally the wrong message. The message the government should be saying is that if you do the right thing, you will be looked after by the government if something goes wrong. That is, in a sense, what we do with the military covenant. People enter into the armed service of our country, and if something goes wrong, then they expect the government to look after them, and we do. And we should be doing exactly the same for those who have suffered vaccine damage, instead of talking around the subject in the way that the reply from the Minister to this petition suggests is the government policy. I'll give way.
I do thank my friend for giving way, and he's been very generous with his time so far today. I just wanted to ask, I've been listening really intently to what he has to say. I'm just conscious, in terms of the narrative here, how do we ensure that, yes, on the one hand, people who do suffer severe disablement as a result of vaccines get that support and pain, but on the other hand, we do not create a culture of hesitancy where people don't uptake vaccines or equally don't produce vaccines. There's a fear of being cast that these things might cause mass severe side effects. I'm just conscious to hear his views on that.
Well, I'm trying to address that point, because obviously you can't ignore the fact that there is a fear out there about vaccination. And it's not, in a sense, you can't suppress reports of coroners saying somebody's died as a result of having a vaccination. You can't suppress reports. I know from my own personal knowledge of people who have suffered people in really good health, and then they had their first vaccine. And I know of one person in particular who then had a stroke and was in hospital for some time of that, and then had severe heart problems, and even had to be referred to Harefield Hospital. Now, those are not just anecdotes, those are facts which are known across the country by people. The government may have not been too keen to promote that information, but I think in failing to do that, it is actually counterproductive. Those facts are out there, we know that. So what we need to do is to say to people that if they are in that very small minority of people who suffer these adverse consequences, then we will be looking after them absolutely 100% without expecting them to get lawyers engaged and all the rest of, and agonising for their families and loved ones. That's what I think we owe them. And we do that in a number of other fields for people who serve our country. And I would like to equate those people who actually get vaccinated, do the right thing, and act in the public interest, because by being vaccinated we are all collectively able to contribute to better public health for all. But if you do that, then the other side of the coin should be that because you're doing it for the state, for the benefit of the state, then you should be guaranteed that if something goes wrong, then the state will help you. And it's the reluctance of the government to deal with that part of the equation, which I think is so distressing, because it's actually feeding in to those people who are vaccine hesitant. Because I can't say to somebody who comes to my surgery and says that they're nervous about having a vaccine for themselves or for one of their children, well, don't worry, if in the most unlikely event that something goes wrong, you'll be fully recompensed. I can't say that to them. But if I could say that to them, it might be that they'd be more likely to take the risk. That's the issue. I can wait to my honourable friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could he clarify the application of his bill to the devolved authorities, where obviously the vaccination process and the health services are devolved to those particular administrations?
Well, my bill applies to England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And insofar as legislative consent was required, then I'm sure it would be forthcoming. But actually, the problem with this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that in order to be able to get on the statute book, it would have to go through all stages. It probably wouldn't get on the statute book until, say, next summer at the earliest, if everything went right. But what I really want is action now. And that's why I'm very grateful to the Minister for having agreed that I'll be able to go along and discuss this with the Minister responsible, because it is urgent. Some legislation, even if it was accepted across the House, is not going to resolve it, because this bill would only, once enacted, that would only trigger the judge-led inquiry, and that's, that might be years away before we have any action. But what we need is action now in order to help challenge what's called the vaccine hesitancy. But I think most important of all, to give some assurance to those people who are already suffering. Our hospitals have got a large number of inpatients who are only there because those patients took the vaccine. And it's causing a lot of angst for consultants across the country. And that's why I think that the government should say now that it's going to look at these issues of its own back without being required to by Parliament. It will carry out a review which could also include assessing the costs and benefits. Of course I'll give way, yes.
time, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I wonder if the honourable gentleman would agree that his bill would not be required if his own government agreed a date for an investigation into the government's handling of the pandemic, just as the government in Scotland has agreed to.
Well, I disagree with that, because how long does he think that the inquiry into the handling of the pandemic is going to take? I would suspect it to take about 2, 3, 4 years. Now, what I'm talking about is people who are suffering in hospital or at home now because they did the right thing in getting themselves vaccinated and have had adverse reactions as a result. So it may be, he thinks it's a clever political point to talk about the delay in starting a mammoth public inquiry into this. This doesn't need a public inquiry into the causes of COVID. This needs a judge-led inquiry into how we should best and most fairly compensate those who have suffered adverse consequences of doing the right thing. Of course I would do that.
I thank him for giving way. This independent review that he wants to have actioned and the timescale that he's talked about, does he not agree with me that over that period of time the evidence that we need to actually ascertain the vaccine damage will probably be found and those payments will be made?
Well, I don't agree with that, because there's no evidence yet that the government's really getting to grips with this. And as I've said, referring to the yellow reporting card system, we know that there is causation between vaccinations and damage caused by those vaccines. Yet the government, in a lot of its literature, seems to be denying that. Now, if we can establish that there is, as a result of people being vaccinated, some are suffering adverse consequences, severe injury or even death. If we can agree on that, then the issues around causation are probably secondary, because I think that in those circumstances the best solution would be to provide a no-fault compensation scheme. So you don't have to prove a fault and you automatically qualify for compensation. And indeed, that is the condition, ironically, that is the condition to which the government has signed up in going for the COVAX scheme internationally. Because under the WHO COVAX scheme, the government has to agree, and is indeed paying into the COVAX scheme, to indemnify any claims made for vaccine damage arising from the deployment of those vaccines. So if it's good enough for the third world and the COVAX scheme, why aren't we doing something similar in our own country for our own people? And so that's why I'm quite passionate about this, because not only do I know people who've been adversely affected, but I think it's fundamental that if we're going to encourage more people to be vaccinated, that they should be absolutely given that assurance that if they do the right thing, they will receive a compensation. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm glad that the purpose of private members' bills is not always to ensure that they get on the statute, but to give us an opportunity to raise a subject in debate. And because I'm still on my feet, when this bill comes back to be debated later...
Order. Debate to be resumed what day?
Friday next. Well, the first Friday next.
October the 22nd, I believe, 22nd. Is the date that the
much obliged.
Right Honourable Member is searching for. Thank you.